Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to a guide to Civilization 6 for complete beginners. The idea about this series, it'll be probably a short series of videos, is this is aimed for people who have probably never played Civ 6 and may not have any real experience with previous versions of Civilization either. We're going to take a very basic view, try to explain as much as possible so that you can get started playing in this awesome series. We're going to start off right away by diving right into the single player menu over here. Then we're going to hit Create Game. The difference between Create Game and Play Now is Create Game, you can customize the settings for the game, whereas Play Now, it will just go and load something with some fixed settings that you may not be looking for. So we're going to go ahead and hit that. So here we get our setup for defining what the game experience will be. And we're going to start with the bottom of this list over here, where you get to choose the map size. Now, a lot of people, when they want to dive into games like Civilization, they get really drawn towards going for the biggest map size right away. And don't get me wrong, big maps can be a lot of fun. But if you're just starting off in Civ, I definitely recommend that you stick to standard, or even maybe small, and try to keep the game length a little bit more manageable. The reason is you're going to learn so much on your first couple of playthroughs that it's just probably better if you just finish them a little bit sooner. Larger maps tend to take a little bit longer. Certainly, it's going to take a little bit longer between turns because there's going to be more AIs around, because the size of the map determines the default number of players. Standard map will have 8 players, large would have 10, huge would have 12, small would have 6. So with fewer opponents, it will take less time in between turns for all your opponents to make their moves. In addition to that, the victory conditions tend to be a little bit easier to get to. It's a little easier to balance out diplomacy because you have less people to worry about, and so on and so forth. So I do recommend that you avoid the biggest maps on your first playthrough, because you'll really benefit from playing a complete game first, and then going in, if you want to do a huge map, well then go nuts. But standard is actually very nice, very much the Goldilocks zone. You've got 8 total civilizations, so that'll be you plus 7 opponents, which seems to feel like a pretty good mix. There's enough room for everyone to expand and get a few cities, but not too many before conflict starts. So it's a very great little map size. Next up, and again, we're starting from the bottom and working our way up, you have to choose your map type. This will determine the general shape of the world. Continents is probably your most classic sort of default map type here, which tends to have 2 large land masses. Now, it is worth noting that in Civilization 6, there are certain mechanics that are affected by continents. There are leaders, for example, that care about things, whether you are on their continent or not on their continent. For example, Victoria really likes to do things on other people's continents, for example, and Teddy likes to look after things on his own continent. Now, it's worth noting, and this is a little bit counterintuitive at first, in Civilization 6, a single landmass may actually count as more than one continent. The easiest way to think about it is like Europe and Asia. There's a place where Europe and Asia are touching, and yet we consider them to be separate continents. Same thing with the Americas. You can divide the Americas into North and South America, even though, you know, they sort of connect, although that's a pretty tiny little connection, so it's a little bit more understandable why you might subdivide those. But the same thing happens on a continent map. There will just be this sort of, a one big block of land may actually be 2 continents, like a northern half and a southern half, for example. Pangaea is one giant landmass, and again, the same thing may happen, where this one giant landmass may actually be subdivided into multiple continents for game purposes, basically. But continents is probably your most typical pick. Pangaea is a lot of fun, one large landmass, especially if you want to do a lot of war. It's kind of fun to have everyone on one big giant island. Then you've got things like island plates, which are a lot of smaller islands. Then you've got a few different weird maps. I'm not going to talk about them here, but it's worth trying at some point. Most likely to start off with, you want to play with continents or Pangaea. If you want to play a really aquatic-oriented civilization, like, say, maybe Norway, then maybe you want to start with island plates just to make the naval warfare a lot more interesting. But we're going to stick with continents, very, very standard. Game speed. This affects, first of all, how many turns until the game is forced to end by default. It's worth noting it's very rare in Civilization to end a game by running out of turns. Usually, someone wins by, you know, domination or space or religion or culture. Like, there's a bunch of different ways to win Civ 6, and it's very rare to simply run out the game clock. But the most important thing that game speed does is it modifies how long it takes to research technologies and build units and buildings. On marathon speed, you can see here it's 200% slower. It will take you 200% slower. So that actually is triple, right? It'll take you 3 times as long to research things and build things, which means, so it takes more turns to do that. The real sort of upshot of the slower speeds is that you end up moving your units a lot more. You use your units a lot longer before they get made obsolete by higher technologies, or you know, before you can keep building more units, for example. So that's sort of the end result. In practice, slower speeds tend to benefit the player because the player will usually be better at moving units around tactically. So it can actually make the game a little bit more, a little easier at slower speeds over here, but it also can make it a little bit more interesting. Again, for your first game, I definitely recommend that you stick on standard, or maybe even consider going quick. On quick speed, everything builds and researches 33% faster than standard. So this would let you finish a game a little bit faster. I think standard is perfectly good for your first play, and I really enjoy playing on epic quite a bit, just to slow things down a little bit more. Your game difficulty. All right, it's worth noting that Prince difficulty here is the normal baseline difficulty. On Prince, you don't get a bonus, but neither do your AI opponents, and as far as we know at this stage in the game, or it's the stage of understanding the game release, at Prince difficulty, the AI will basically be fully featured. They will be using all the tricks that they have available to them. If you go on one of the easier difficulties over here, you will get small bonuses. For example, slight boost to combat, for example, as you go up to the easiest difficulty, which is Settler. In addition to that, it is very likely that the AI will not do as many things on the lower difficulties over here. We don't have that information available at this time. I can tell you that in Civilization 5, for example, if you're playing on Settler difficulty, the AI literally would never declare war on you. It just was not, that was nothing, or something the AI would literally never consider. You could, of course, still start your own wars, but that was about it. And even on Chieftain and Warlord, it was unlikely that the AI would actually declare war. Now, as you go past Prince and work your way down all the way to Deity, with every step, the AI civilizations in the game will get a larger and larger and larger bonus to production, to science. They will also start with more units. For example, on Emperor, they will start with an extra settler, and actually by the time you get to Deity, they will start with 2 extra settlers. Therefore, they're getting a really, really big boost. In addition, on Deity, they get an 80% boost to their production. They also get 4 free technologies and 4 free civics. So the AI starts with a massive advantage over you. I'm going to go and set myself on Prince, so I've got a baseline experience over here. Of course, if it is your first game, don't be afraid to just start yourself on Settler. Finally, we get to the top of this list here where you've got to pick a civilization / leader. For almost every pick, it is one and the same. For example, this is Philip II of Spain. So you would be playing as Philip II as your leader, and Spain would be your nation. There is one exception to that at this point, and there may be more exceptions down the road as more DLC and expansions and so on get released. The exception is that Gorgo is technically like a Spartan leader, I guess, but they say Gorgo of Greece, and there's also Pericles of Greece. Both of these nations are Greek. They have a slightly different flag, but they both count as being Greek. They share some of the same policies and some of the same unique units and buildings. They actually only have one trait that is slightly different between the two. At this stage in the game, you don't have to worry too much because, you know, if you're brand new, you may not understand what all of the different traits mean. Most of these nations will generally play the same. A lot of their traits are maybe more optimal for pursuing one path versus another, but actually every nation can basically do everything. So don't stress too much about it for your first game. There's like one tiny exception might be that playing as the Congo, you actually can't create your own religion. That's a little bit odd. Also, we're going to learn about districts in game. Quite a few of these nations have a unique district that tends to replace an existing district. For example, if you do play as Greece, instead of building the Theater Square district, you would be building the Acropolis instead, but it effectively fills the same role, so it's not too critical. For my example here, I'm going to be playing as America because America is, in a very significant way, very vanilla, especially early on. It doesn't have anything particularly odd going on, and it's going to be a good baseline to show. England is also relatively similar in that it doesn't have anything particularly bizarre going on. It does have a unique district called the Royal Navy Dockyard that replaces the normal the normal harbor district, but other than that, it's especially in the early game, it's pretty sort of a baseline nation, whereas a lot of the others have some sort of unique or odd or different mechanic to play with. But again, it's all going to be pretty samey. So I'm going to start as Teddy Roosevelt, and I'm going to start the game, but I will note there's also an advanced setup button over here. If you go here, you'll get quite a few more options to tune your experience, but I'm going to be quite happy with this. So I'm going to set it to Prince. You don't worry about going to an easier difficulty. That's going to be perfectly fine. Standard speed, continents, standard map size. Excellent. We'll start that up. Depending on how fast your computer is, and especially how fast your hard drive is, it will take a variable amount of time for you to load the game here. You do get an excellent narration by Sean Bean. You can also review your features and abilities. So the reason I say that Teddy Roosevelt feels relatively vanilla is that there's nothing that changes the gameplay in a really obvious manner. It is worth noting that Roosevelt, his units have a +5 combat strength on their home continent. I was talking about the continent mechanic. So if we are fighting on the same continent as our capital, we will get a bonus to combat strength, which is pretty substantial. And then there's something here with appeal and national parks. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And you can see he's got a unique air unit, a unique land unit, and a unique building over here that only as America can you build it. Okay, so we have just loaded into the game over here, and this is our first screen. If you have done the tutorial, you've been taught about the controls, but just to review, you can click and drag the mouse, or the map around. You can zoom in and out. Very common ways to work things. We're going to talk about the user interface around us in just a moment, but let's focus on what's going on in the middle of the screen. We have 2 units to start off with. And as far as I know, I'm pretty sure all of the different leaders start with 2 units like this. We have a settler unit with the flag here, and we also have a warrior unit here. The warrior is your starting military type unit. It is a melee unit, so it does battle by basically trying to walk onto another unit. Both units fight each other, and then one will take more damage than the other, and if one unit runs out of hit points, it will die. We'll talk about the combat mechanics more in a little bit. Your settler unit is responsible for creating your cities. You start with one, and in order to expand your empire, unless you're going to war and just stealing cities, you will be building more settlers later on so that you can found more cities. The map over here, your map view can be tuned a little bit. If it doesn't look exactly like it does for me, there is a button right over here above the mini-map called Map Options. If you click on that, you can see you can turn off the grid, for example. You can toggle the resource icons. You can show yield icons as well over here. I think that this default setup is perfectly great. I think it's good, so we're just going to go ahead and leave that there. We can see a few things about the map over here. You can mouse over a tile and find out more information about it. So these are grassland tiles. They are flat. They are not hills. They are grassland, which produce a decent amount of food. You can see here it produces 2 food. We don't necessarily know the implication of that yet, but, you know, all right, we're getting some information. Over here, we've got some lumpy terrains. These are grassland hills. So a grassland hill does count as a grassland, but because it's hilly, it actually has an extra point of production. If we work this tile, we will get 2 food and 1 production. Well, that sounds pretty good. We don't know what that is, but it's more, so it's probably better. Here we have a resource on this tile. There are effectively 3 different types or categories of resources. There are strategic resources, and horses count as that. And you can actually, if you mouse over the actual horse graphic here, it'll tell you that horses are a strategic resource. You require animal husbandry, which is a technology, before you can actually make full use of these horses. Basically, you need the animal husbandry tech to be able to build a pasture so that you get a bigger bonus. But even without that, this tile would produce 3 food and 1 production. A grassland with horses gives you an extra food and an extra production. Ooh, that's quite nice. Strategic resources, like horses, as well as things later on like iron, oil, coal, they are used, generally speaking, to enable better unit types or different unit types. For example, there will be certain mounted units like horsemen that will require you to have horses to be able to build those units. If you don't have horses, then you can't build those units. Most units in the game, I think it's fair to say most units in the game, or at least probably half the units in the game, don't require any strategic resources whatsoever. We have another resource over here, stone, which is considered a bonus resource. Basically, bonus resources, as far as I know, don't really do anything special, right? They don't necessarily unlock a unit type like the horses, like strategic resources do, but they tend to just produce more. So this is a grassland hill with stone on it. You can see it produces 2 food, 2 production. So the stone means it's 1 better than a regular grassland hill. Not only that, but we will be able to build a quarry on this later on to get even more production, which is awesome. Over here, we've got fish. This is another bonus resource, which makes the sea tile a little bit more productive. You can see we get food and gold from this tile, as opposed to this coast tile, which just produces 1 food and 1 gold. So the fish by itself produces 1 extra food. And later on, when we improve it with fishing boats, it'll produce even more stuff for us. But that's another bonus resource. The last type of resource is a luxury resource. Diamonds here are an example. I believe the fur over here will also be a luxury resource. The wheat here is just a bonus resource. Luxury resources do improve the tile, just like every other resource. But the bonus to this is luxury resources make your people happier. It produces something called amenities, which we're going to talk about soon. Okay, so we got a bit of a look at the map. We've got mountains over here. It's worth noting mountains. You can't walk through mountains, but there's actually some other really substantial bonuses. You can't work the mountains. You can't walk through them. In a way, they're sort of a dead tile. But what they do is they do really important things to the tiles next to them. And we'll see that relatively soon. And we've got a river here. The river by itself exists between tiles, so you don't work the river. You don't do anything with the river itself, but it has certain implications with your unit movement. Usually, when units cross a river, it will end their turn because it's a lot of work to cross a river. But it becomes particularly important for certain types of improvements and wonders and districts later on. Anyway, let's go ahead and create our first city over here. It should be noted, sometimes what you actually want to do is move your warrior first, because you don't have to create your city where your settler starts. Usually, it's fine, because the game tries to place the settler in a good spot. But sometimes you'd be like, maybe it would be a little bit better if we just moved a little bit over. Maybe, we would take advantage of more stuff. Can you tell what your city will get to take advantage of? Well, wherever you plant the city, you will eventually be able to work stuff up to 3 tiles away, or 3 hexes away. So if I settle here, and I can count 1, 2, 3, I'll eventually be able to work the furs. That's great. What about 1, 2, 3? Ooh, I'll get the fish. If I were to move here, then what would happen is I'd no longer be able, the city would never be able to work the fish. That might be okay if there happened to be another resource over here. So if our original configuration is a bit different, and we had a warrior stay over here, we might be tempted to move the warrior to the right, just to see if there was anything good over here and we might want to move. But in this case, I'm very happy with our location. So what I'm going to do is hit this button over here. So here we have our settler selected. I can change what unit I have selected by just clicking on their little icon. And down here, it'll show me what unit I've selected. And the settler has a special button here that says Found City. You can also hit, I believe, the B key on the keyboard to build the city. So we're going to go and found this, and this creates Washington. Depending on what nation you're playing as, you will get a different name for your capital, and certainly your cities will be, and your cities and your borders will be colored differently. But here we are America, we are blue. Our border here is dashed currently, and that's to indicate the fact that in the early game, these quote-unquote borders are not really borders. Enemy units will be able to walk through these borders, period, and without being opposed. Later on in the game, in fact, quite early on in the game, you will sort of advance your diplomatic status, and these borders will become a solid line. And then your borders will be closed to other civilizations unless you explicitly open them. All right, so we've got Washington there, and you can see at the bottom right corner of the screen, it's actually telling us to choose production. This button over here will always prompt you about what you need to do next. And actually, there's also a couple extra icons to show you what else will come up. Like, we'll need to pick a technology, and one of our units will need orders. But let's go ahead and just deal with this. So, if I click this button, what it's actually going to do is it's going to select Washington for me and open up its production queue. I could do this manually as well. If I X out of this, let's say I choose my warrior, I can click on the nameplate here for Washington, select the city. You can see here now I've got Washington selected. I get some information about this. We're going to find out what that is later. Actually, probably next here. And there's a button here that says Change City Production. That gets me to the exact same screen as before. It's generally very convenient to just use this button. It brings you to the next thing you're supposed to do. All right, now we have the option of building something in the city. We've got the first area over here is districts and buildings. Right now, the only option we have is the ability to build a monument within our city center. If you have played previous versions of Civ, once we start unlocking districts, things will feel very weird and odd. But basically, your city isn't just the central tile in Civilization 6 anymore. The central tile is your city center district, and you will be building other districts in other tiles later on. And all of your districts, including the city center, can have buildings built within it. So this monument is a building we can build in the city center. Note that you have a little advisor tag here that can recommend different units. It's probably okay if you use that to influence your decision when you're new to the game. But honestly, there's many times when I will disagree with this and pick something else. So don't think that this is really like the pro move, and if you picked something else like a warrior here, that would be a mistake. In fact, I would probably suggest building an early warrior or a slinger. We'll talk about that in a moment. So when you mouse over any of these things, it tells you what it does. So the monument, for example, would take 60 production points to build. But it tells you, more importantly perhaps, that this would take 15 turns to produce. And if once this is built, it would give us an extra 2 culture every turn. Okay, well, what's the deal with that? If you look at the top left corner of the screen, this is all the science, culture, faith, and gold that your empire is producing every turn. This is your entire empire, not just your city. As you can see right now, we are currently producing 1.4 culture per turn. We don't know what culture does yet, but the monument would give us, well, more than double. That seems like a lot, and it is. And building monuments, very, very good thing. Early on in the game, though, I would definitely recommend that you focus probably on building a unit of some kind. Builders are used to improve your terrain. Specifically, builder units are the ones that are going to build farms on wheat, build mines on diamonds, build quarries on stone, build pastures on horses. They can also actually farm. At the start of the game, they can farm any flat land except tundra, or desert, I suppose. So, okay, at the start of the game, they can farm plains or grasslands, I suppose is probably the most accurate way to say it. In addition to that, they can also mine hills like this to give extra production, even though there are no resources on there. So builders make all of your tiles better, and that's really good, but it's probably not the first thing you want to build. I would say early on, if you're in a higher difficulty, you will want to build probably a couple of military units. I feel very comfortable if I end up with a slinger and a second warrior, in whichever order. I think normally I go slinger first. A scout's also very nice. Scout actually moves a little bit faster. If you mouse over, you can see the scout has a movement of 3, whereas all the other units you can build right now have a movement of 2. Scouts aren't very good at fighting. They only have a melee strength of 10. Warriors have a melee strength of 20. You don't know how the combat works yet, but clearly warriors are twice as good as fighting as scouts. Actually, the way the fighting works, warriors are even more than twice as good at scouts as fighting. But scouts move very, very quickly, and that does help them scoot a boot, as I like to say. The other thing, we're not going to deal with experience points much in this tutorial, because I think it's a little bit more advanced, and you'll just discover it organically as you go. But it's worth noting that scouting units gain experience points simply for scouting, for revealing new tiles, whereas military units gain experience points through fighting. So a scout's quite valuable, and if you're playing on a lower difficulty, honestly, I think building a scout first, maybe even 2 scouts in a row, is a fine and solid move. But if you want to be safer, especially against barbarians, I would definitely build a couple of military units first, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties. But again, starting with a monument first, on lower difficulties especially, that's not bad either. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a slinger. A slinger is another military unit, but it's a ranged unit, and I want to build it so we can talk about the differences between different types of combat. So a slinger it is. Next, you can see that the little prompt in the bottom right corner says, I need to choose a research. And that's actually what this world tracker is also showing as well. The world tracker says we are currently working on Code of Laws, but we don't currently have a research going on here. So that's okay. We'll hit this button over here, which is the same as hitting the button here. And what this will do, and you can see this list here, and again, if I just clicked right there, we get exactly the same thing. This shows me the list of technologies I can research right now. We've got animal husbandry, astrology, mining, pottery, and sailing. We also have the ability to open up the technology tree over here. The technology tree shows every technology in the game. We can see the technologies in gray here. These are the ones I can research. They're the same as the previous list. Sailing, astrology, pottery, animal husbandry, and mining. We've got these sort of beigey ones over here. These represent technologies I can't research right now. You can see these dashed lines show you if you want to be able to research irrigation, you have to research pottery first. If we follow this dashed line back, pottery is a prerequisite to irrigation. Now, what you can do is you can click, even though I can't research irrigation directly, I could click on here in the technology tree. What it will do, it will queue things up. You can see the little number 1. It will research pottery first, and then it will research irrigation. You can even do this for like something crazy. I want to research stirrups. Actually, that's not the example I want. There we go. Education. You can see this education will be the 8th one in the row that we research, because it's got a lot of prerequisites along multiple branches. Now, normally, you don't do this. You don't go super deep into the tech tree that much anyway. It's much more common for you to start, you know, maybe queue up a little bit like this, but that's about it. The other thing you can do, and people are always finding out about this, you can use the shift key. So let's say I clicked on irrigation. So we're going to research pottery, then irrigation. Then I'm going to hold shift and click on, say, wheel. And you can see the order of technology is going to go pottery, irrigation, then it's going to go mining into wheel. You can shift click technologies to queue them up. 1, 2, 3 like this. Whereas if you don't hold shift, then it's just going to cycle between them. So what do you research first? Honestly, there's never going to be a 100% clear right answer and 100% clear wrong answer. Many things in civilizations just depends. It depends on your current circumstances. Let's go and take a look. So I can't unclick this, so let's just leave, say, pottery on for now. But I'm going to click this. I'm going to close this window and take a look at our circumstances. We know, if you mouse over here, we know we need animal husbandry at some point for horses. What else do we need? Well, we need mining to take advantage of the stone. We also need mining to take advantage of the diamonds. Okay, that's all really, really quite important. Is that something we want to get early? Maybe. So let's go back to the tech tree by clicking this button over here. So mining, we can build mines. We can build quarries. So quarries is what you build on stone. Mine would be for the diamonds. So maybe we want this really early. On the other hand, animal husbandry, this would allow us to build the pasture really early. Pottery would unlock the granary, which gives us more food, which is really good. Also, pottery is a prerequisite for writing. Writing gets you science. Science is pretty good in these games. Astrology. Hey, do you want to play a religious game? Well, astrology unlocks the holy site and Stonehenge. We'll talk more about how these work in, well, the next video, because this one's getting a bit long. But maybe you want that. Or, hey, maybe you're starting on the coast and you've got a lot of fish and crabs and different things like that. Maybe you want to be able to build fishing boats really early on, so maybe you will start with that. It depends on your start and what you feel like doing. There's one thing to note. We haven't talked, every one of these technologies here says to boost, do something. Okay? These are criteria where if you meet this, so if you found a city on the coast, you will boost sailing. If you find a natural wonder, you will boost astrology. If you farm a resource, i.e. build a farm on a resource like that wheat, then you will boost irrigation. What does boosting mean? Boosting will give you, for free, half of the technology researched. So you can see that irrigation would take 18 turns to research right now. If we put a farm on that wheat, then half of irrigation would get researched for us, which means we'd only need 9 more turns to finish the job. One of the most powerful things you can do in civilization is try to trigger these boosts. Don't necessarily go out of your way. Like sometimes you might not get around to doing something. You know, it's fair to just, you know, research it normally. But it's really nice if you can research things that you have boosts for, because it's just more efficient, right? So you may want to use that in some of your planning. It's worth noting that the first 3 technologies in the list can never be boosted over here. Literally every other tech can be boosted, but the first 3 cannot. So sometimes it's better to do that. I think, gosh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what I want to teach first. I do want to unlock writing because that's fun to show, but I guess we don't have to. Let me go and I'll tell you what, we're going to go ahead and get mining first, just because we have 2 resources that we could improve with mining. I'm not sure that that's, you know, that necessarily the optimal pick here. It's just a pick. Maybe you don't necessarily care about pottery for the granary itself, but you really want to unlock the campus as soon as possible. Maybe you want to get to irrigation as soon as possible, so then all of a sudden pottery becomes more valuable. What's the right answer? I don't know. That's something for you to figure out. All right, next you can see down here in the bottom right corner, it is prompting us that a unit needs orders. And indeed, this warrior doesn't have any actions yet. This warrior, while you have it selected, while you have any unit selected, you're going to get this light blue outline, or a teal maybe, I don't know, that shows you how far you can go. Note the warrior, which has a movement of 2, can move 2 tiles over here. If I just hold down the right mouse button, I can actually get a preview of how he would walk. So he can go 2 tiles over this way. Here we can only move 1 tile or 1, and it ends. I can't go any further. In fact, if I try to go further, it tells me it'll take 2 turns to get here. Why is that? Well, different terrain has a different movement cost. Hills and forest and rainforest cost 2 movement for you to enter, which means if I move up here, that is into a hill, that's going to cost me 2 movement. You can actually see it on the tooltip. It says movement 2, movement cost 2. So we'll use up all my movement to move onto this hill. Now, you're going to, all right, that's fine. But these horses, these are on flat land. And actually, if I try to move here, it'll tell me if the tooltip ever shows up. All right, that's weird. This only has a movement rate of 1, or it only has a movement cost of 1. I know that because it's flat land. So why can't I move into this hill? Well, again, the hill here has a movement cost of 2. So even though I'll have 1 movement left over here, I will not be able to enter this hill. If you have played Civilization 5, note that this is a reversal of how it worked in Civ 5. So I think what I'm going to do, also note that crossing a river, at least at this point in the game, will always end your turn. So we're going to go, I think I'm going to move south over here. Because one of the nice things about ending your turn on a hill is you're higher up and you can actually see a little further. And I want to see what's on the other side of this hill here, or this river. So I'm going to do that. Oh, found some crabs over here. We found more forest. We've got rainforest down here. Quite a bit of it, actually. All right, that's good. And this is the end of our very first turn. Now, you can see here where it says next turn in the bottom right corner, I have nothing left to do. I mean, you can still do things. I could go to the city. I could decide to change my mind about our production. We could look at more of these buttons. We could do different things like this. But there's nothing else that hasn't been sort of dealt with. So I think it's perfectly fine for us to go to the next turn. We're going to do that. It goes to please wait because all the computer players are taking their turn. Now we are on turn 2. And once again, unit needs orders. In fact, that's going to be the only thing I have to do this turn because Washington needs 8 more turns to build a slinger. And 6 more turns to grow. That's what this number means over here. Mining needs 8 more turns before it's done. And Code of Laws, we haven't talked about civics yet, is going to take 14 more turns. Okay, that's fine. We're going to put a cut in this video. When we come back, I'm going to go and probably fast forward just to when the technology and the slinger is about to finish. And then we're also going to talk about more of the information here on the city tile, as well, which will help us make better decisions going forward. Thanks for watching, folks. See you next time.